be with all of you. I would like to reiterate a point made by my Chinese colleague and a colleague from Ghana about context in which this actions need to be seen. We have to remember Bali Action Plan and others in seeing it. Next step, in interest of time, I will skip these comments after just noting that. So, India gave a voluntary action, communicated its voluntary action. Next clip, please. It will endeavor to reduce emission intensity of GDP by 20 to 25% by 2020 in comparison to 2005 levels. This excludes agricultural emissions. Agricultural emissions have been more or less constant in India, and that's why it was excluded. If it was included, the percentage could have been higher. For all, I just want to remind that GDP will grow, but the emission per unit of GDP is expected to come down. Next please. If you take this target, then in 2020, assuming India GDP growth at 8%, India will be emitting about 2.6 ton per capita, which will be fairly low by the average of world. Our average was of Annex 1 countries in 2005. Next. Reducing emission intensity is a difficult task for India because of the development deficit that it has to cover. It has to lift 470 million people out of poverty, build homes, build roads. Next slide. Very large percentage of Indian population stays in non-permanent housing. Next slide. And in this phase of development and industrialization, there is a tremendous need of building infrastructure which needs cement, steel, and many other energy-intensive materials. Next. So, as I will show you, India's crude steel production will become 4 times in just 10 years. This is required for building this infrastructure. Next. And still, even after that, in 2012, it will be just 9% of the present world production. So even then, it will be small. Next. This India is doing in a very efficient manner. India's cement production is one of the most efficient in the world. A UN report which was released just last month showed that in last 10 years, India's manufacturing grew at 7% per year, but its energy consumption increased only by 3.6%. So India's industrialization is happening in a very efficient manner. We have very correct price signals for these for a long time. I'll talk about it in a minute. So despite rising efficiency, the energy intensity is not decreasing and in fact slightly increasing. Go to the next one. And here I want to emphasize that past trends of a country are not necessarily what the future is looking like. And when we use these terms of business as usual, there's some trend which is going down can change over time. Can you go to the next slide? So this is not exactly emission intensity, but a proxy to that of fossil fuel emissions of India per unit of GDP. And you can see that it was decreasing because of already putting pricing mechanisms and so on for quite some time. But because of the infrastructure creation, it's actually slightly going up. And there were some papers which talked about India's target being easy, which it is not, because we are actually on an upward rising trend of intensity. Next. And this has been observed in many countries at a particular phases of industrialization. Next. Hence, India's mitigation target has to be understood in this context. By the way, I also want to take this opportunity to mention that India is one of the very efficient country in terms of energy per unit of GDP. It is comparable to EU in terms of energy intensity. And it has very little renewable potential, still its emissions are per unit of GDP have been pretty low. Next. Now let me take this slide talk about some of the specific action India has been taking. As some of you would know, India introduced a cess on coal about $3.2 in PPP terms, which is more than a $1 US dollar in market exchange term, starting from 2010, resulting into an annual fund of about $2 billion PPP. This it did even when it needs very great need for low-cost energy, low-cost coal energy. We have energy shortages, blackouts. Those who have visited India would know. And despite that, India has done that. We have already sizable pricing mechanisms which I mentioned some time ago. Gasoline in India is 50% costlier in market exchange terms compared to some of the industrialized countries. In purchasing power parity, it would be far more expensive. Industrial electricity tariff in India is more than 11 cents, US cents, which is substantially more than many other some of the industrialized countries. This has been driving energy efficiency in industry already. For example, 2/3 of the light points in India are already on fluorescence, and we are trying to even increase that to nearly full. India has a preferential tariff for renewable energy. We recently introduced certificates where renewable energy in one part of the country can be sold in another part without actually transmitting that. So it says the certificate. So some countries have problem of transmission capacity, some countries have problems about one area not being able to sell in another area. We have addressed many of these issues. And India was one of the first country to have Ministry of Non-Conventional Energy Sources long back. We already have about 9% of our installed capacity, electricity capacity on renewables, which is one of the high end in the world. This is despite the fact that Indian wind speeds are very low, so the same windmill produces much less electricity, and hence the cost goes up. We have some states are going ahead with action plans. We have announced a national mission for enhanced energy efficiency, which expects to save about 25 million tons by 2050, and it is being upgraded on a continuous basis. It plans to promote super efficient appliances and has been collaborating with several countries. Next. Let me list some of the NAMAs that we have been undertaking, some of the high-cost NAMAs. Next. India announced a national solar mission for 20,000 megawatts of solar by 2022, and 600 megawatts out of that have already been commissioned. Some more will be contracted next year. India is planning for nuclear energy, sizable increase in renewable energy, and green mission. And the other columns list the estimated benefits in million tons per year in 2020, and the estimated additional cost over and above what it would have costed us to have low cost energy. So as you can see, India is very substantially paying from its own limited resources right now. And as has been mentioned earlier, assistance in terms of technology, in terms of other factors, is substantially going to help India to achieve its target. Thank you.
Thank you for that, sir. I think you can remain in your seat. Before we turn to our session of question and answers, I had a brief request from Indonesia, from the